call the Ordinance Committee meeting of December 13th to order, and can we start with a roll call?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
And Chair Snedden.
Here, thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not.
Thank you. And any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, we will invite staff presentation on proposed municipal code amendments pertaining to the Santa Barbara Arts and Crafts Show.
Good afternoon, Chair Snedden and council members. My name is Jason Bryan. I am the Senior Recreation Supervisor for the Active Adults and Classes section of the Parks and Recreation Department. A mouthful. And one of the programs that we administer is the Santa Barbara Arts and Crafts Show. Today's presentation will review a significant collaborative effort between the Arts and Crafts Show Advisory Committee, show members, and department staff. A major review of show policies began with a presentation to the Parks and Recreation Commission at the January 2021 meeting and was a focus of 21 advisory committee meetings over a year and a half. We'll review milestones achieved in this process that include updates to Municipal Code Chapter 15.08. Oops, let me catch up here, sorry. To give you a little bit of a background, the show started in 1965 by artist Robert Eischen. He was inspired by European sidewalk shows and art festivals in Mexico City. It started with 12 artists right here in front of City Hall in De La Guerra Plaza. The show quickly outgrew De La Guerra Plaza and moved to Cabrillo Boulevard, where it was temporarily expanded to Saturdays and Sundays. It was called the Sábado and Domingo Art Show back then. Craft members creating jewelry, clothing, and other functional items were invited to join the show shortly after the event relocated to the waterfront. The show required members to live in Santa Barbara County and do all the work themselves without the help from employees, friends, or family members. Municipal Code Chapter 15.08 is a skeleton that provides the framework for the Arts and Crafts Show. 15.08 defines the location, schedule, and general structure of the show. The show's procedures and regulations go into much more granular detail on the day-to-day operations. The city has worked with an advisory committee for input on maintaining operational guidelines and administering the show. The show was first codified in 1974 and has only had minor changes since then. Procedures are updated regularly and can be found on the department's website. The show is reasonably priced compared to similar opportunities and currently includes a little over 150 members. All show members pay the same fee regardless of booth size and whether or not they have assigned spaces in the show. As mentioned before, the municipal code section governing the show has only received several minor updates since 1974. Parks and Recreation took on the effort of updated the code and show procedures to allow the show to remain a vibrant community activity into the future. Show members and staff determined that there were several updates needed to streamline the show by improving efficiencies, improving equity, and modernizing the operation to ensure the show's vitality, which is an important part of members' livelihood. This was a significant project. Staff worked with show members in the advisory committee on these 5 major topics on the slide. One of the more significant changes was integrating the show, which was only included in the municipal code for advisory committee representation. It never really went into how the show was structured as far as separate sections. The show was segregated into separate arts and crafts sections from the time the crafts were invited to join the show in 1971 until the show was shut down in March of 2020 due to COVID. There were numerous requests from crafts members to integrate the show over the past decades. When the show was able to resume in October of 2020, it was about a third of its regular size, so that provided an opportunity for us to kind of test the waters, and it couldn't continue in that segregated format. The show was integrated at that time as a temporary measure, but the feedback was positive from most members who participated from both sections. The advisory committee reviewed another request for integration and ultimately supported a process for integration through attrition, where existing members were able to retain their spaces and open spaces would be filled in regardless of prior section assignment. The January 2022 quarterly space assignment meeting was the first time members were placed solely on the basis of attendance and seniority. So that was when it started to officially integrate. Before integration, crafts members could sell decorative fine arts, but art members could not sell functional items such as greeting cards. That went away as well. So it's now a little bit more of a level playing field. The committee reviewed sections of the procedures and regulations to update outdated language and reviewed several policies, but a couple of the policies that were reviewed were allowing prints for traditional mediums, such as painting and drawing, and considering expanding to members beyond Santa Barbara County. The show previously allowed prints, but only for photographers. Members working on paint and canvas or other mediums were not allowed to sell prints, even if they used their own printers, like photographers did. The committee ultimately approved prints for all mediums, as long as members produced their prints using their own equipment. Again, a level playing field. The committee considered expanding membership beyond Santa Barbara County, but ultimately and overwhelmingly suggested that membership be restricted to residents of the county. And that's the way the show had started from its genesis. All of the procedures are reviewed by the advisory committee. The procedures and recommendations document can be found on the show's website under member resources. The show considered changes to the advisory committee. Staff originally suggested an appointment process, like many other groups are formed. However, the members wanted to see their representatives selected by election. So we're continuing the election process, so show members pick who represents themselves on the advisory committee. Without show sections now, the group discussed ways to ensure a balance of interest on the advisory committee. They ultimately recommended a system where 2 of the 4 elected members primarily produced decorative fine arts, the former art section, and the other 2 primarily produced functional crafts, the former crafts section. There's also a member-at-large position appointed by the Parks and Recreation Commission by someone outside the show, but that position has been vacant for much of the show's history. Terms were increased from 18 months to 2 years, and the committee's chair term was increased from 6 months to 1 year to reduce frequency of elections and increase the committee's productivity by making fewer leadership changes. 18-month terms were unusually short for other advisory groups, and 6 months for a chairperson is quite rare. With the approval of the advisory committee, the city established a system of allowing online voting for elections. And the July election that we just had resulted in an impressive 62% participation, which is pretty good for elections. One of the other things that the topics that was considered on this major policy review, although not part of municipal code, this was important to the commission and the community, was to explore ways to diversify use of the waterfront area on show days. Previously, other events were not even considered if they had any impact whatsoever on the show. A system was developed that allowed coordination of other events that were compatible with the Arts and Crafts Show in a way that was intended to expand opportunities and expand both groups. The first test case was the 2021 Santa Barbara Half Marathon that coordinated well with minimal impact to the show. Children's Fiesta Parade, and more recently Pacific Pride Festival, and last month's second half marathon in the waterfront area were other examples of successful coordination between waterfront events. One of the policy topics that required several meetings was to review the violation procedure. The department's standard code of conduct was used as the foundation for the show's new policies. Similar to the department's standard policy, the show approached violations in 3 categories: minor violations, major violations, and extreme violations. So we used that as as kind of the framework and developed a compromise that merges allowing advisory committee input with our standard practices throughout the rest of the department. Suspensions or expulsions can be appealed to the Parks and Recreation Director, similar to the department's standard procedures. But some members were concerned that all final decisions were being made by staff. So the department is providing the ability for the director's decision to be appealed to the Parks and Recreation Commission. This has been the past practice and was always part of Municipal Code 15.08. Unlike past practice, however, the Commission's decision will be final, and that decision cannot be appealed to the full City Council. We're not aware of any past appeal that went all the way to City Council. It always ended at the Commission level. But this is the procedure that's recommended to move forward, and we think it's a nice balance. Chapter 15.08 has been reviewed by the City Attorney's Office, who made many updates that address both recent show changes and a much-needed general update. Proposed revisions include these topics to address improvements to achieve the goals of improving efficiencies, improving show equity, and modernizing the operation to ensure the show's vitality. As I mentioned before, the municipal code did not separate the show into sections, except for the advisory committee, and we addressed that in these proposed amendments. The Parks and Recreation Commission was presented with the draft municipal code changes and unanimously approved moving forward with the recommended changes to the Ordinance Committee. In summary, staff is requesting the changes to Municipal Code Chapter 15.08 be forwarded to full City Council for adoption. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the proposed amendments to the chapter or the Arts and Crafts Show in general.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Do we have questions from committee members? Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How much outreach has been done to the participants of the art show?
We've had like 21 meetings. We've had a lot of updates as far as opportunities for input. Ultimately, these changes were unanimously approved by the advisory committee. And for this meeting, I did send out to all members the agenda once it was ready, and it was presented to them that we would be bringing this to the ordinance committee as part of the final phase of the process for the municipal code.
And are these suggestions coming from them or from city staff?
This was a collaborative effort. So we presented, we made some compromises as far as, for instance, the appointment process is something that we originally were contemplating, but we ended up with an election process. So this truly was a collaborative process back and forth between the city, the advisory committee, and the show members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Jordan?
Thank you. Are you at capacity down there with your artists?
A lot of things have changed over the years. We're not even close to capacity, which is 290 members. We're a little over 150 right now, but things have changed. Retail has changed. Other opportunities. The website didn't exist it didn't exist when the show was young, so it may not be. Again, that we have a waiting list to get into the show, but it's still a vibrant artistic expression in Santa Barbara.
And I would assume a better spot is closer to the wharf than farther from the wharf. So do you guys just juggle that as capacity and seniority combine together?
There is a well-established procedure for this where space assignments are made at these quarterly space assignment meetings. Once you have an assigned space, you retain it. Unless you have less than basically 50% attendance. We provide opportunities for medical excuses or leaves of absence. But members, once they get a good space, they tend to stick in that good space. And we have members in the show since the 1970s.
Okay. And then I was, I guess, just interested in the focus that's in this on enforcement. What are the issues? I'm assuming you're making changes to address issues that have been lingering around. I mean, as behavior or weaseling in when you're not supposed to be there, or vice versa, has that always been an issue, and so this is why it's being addressed at this time?
Well, they're like any group of this size, and these are people who draw outside the lines a little bit, so there can be some behavioral, there can be some simple misunderstanding, but the previous procedures were quite arduous to go through. Sending certified letters, a simple violation could take several hearings and several months. It wasn't really streamlined, and it didn't really match what we did in the rest of the department.
And then I saw the provision in there for taking care of restricting types of sales out of the back of a vehicle, kind of piggybacking while you're parked on the street. so I'll just go off on a tangent. I'm just wondering how the vending cart vendors are operating down there on the Sundays when the artists are in force there too, if there's any conflicts or how that's going.
Councilmember Jordan, there are currently cart vendors down there. We are in the education period right now. I believe it was April that ordinance was passed regulating sidewalk vending. And at council's direction, it was educational only in the first year. So they're still operating there. There were provisions in that code for kind of a buffer zone around the show. However, the commerce from vehicles is a separate legal matter and is addressed in one of the amendments that we're presenting here. Right now, if people were organized, they could, have 50 vehicles take up the entire parking and kind of kill the show. So this addresses that, and I know the city is working on a similar municipal code that's broader than just the arts and crafts show that'll be presented to you in the future.
So I'm really more interested in the tangent part of that and how the education period is going with the vendors, or if it's just like whack-a-mole and you educate 1 week and 2 weeks later you're educating the same person again because we're in this grace period.
Well, it is education only right now, so we see the same faces typically, and we have an information sheet that has been prepared by the city that's bilingual that we hand out to the cart vendors. And we don't have a lot of commerce from vehicles. I saw one a couple weeks ago, and I spoke to the operator personally and gave him information on what the potential changes are going to be. But we typically don't see very many vehicles operating along Cabrillo Boulevard.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And then I have a couple of questions too. The first one is about the committee makeup. So is the Parks and Recreation appointee, is that a Parks and Rec committee member, or are they holding interviews and appointing a member at large, or how does that work?
Chair Sneddon, the at-large position is something that is advertised on the city's website. Frankly, I've had 2 people in my 12 or so years working with the Arts and Crafts Show that have ever filled that position, and they are interviewed by the Park and Recreation Commission and then appointed by the Park and Recreation Commission.
Okay.
And that's how they get seated on the committee.
And then could you highlight again what the change is then on the committee makeup, or is it they wanted to stay status quo?
The changes, Chair Sneddon, on the committee makeup is changing from 18-month terms to 24-month terms, and the chair position from 6 months to 1 year. And we address the makeup of the committee in the procedures and regulations rather than municipal code.
Thank you. And then some of those, the designation is sort of former arts or former crafts, and so I'm wondering over time what happens when we don't have them designated by arts or crafts anymore. How do you make that determination?
Chair Sneddon, right now as we are interviewing candidates for the show, like we will later tonight, we designate what their primary is. So if they're primary arts or primary crafts. Perhaps in the future, that could go away. We don't know. That's something that we can allow flexibility with the advisory committee process.
Thank you. And then along the lines of Councilmember Jordan's questions, the prohibit vending from vehicles, does that count? Is it push carts, food trucks, or vehicles selling goods? Is it anything, everything, or if you could just give a little bit more detail?
Chair Sneddon, the commerce from vehicles is any type of commerce. Typically, what we would see would be, a food truck, beverage. There was a coffee truck there the other week that I spoke to, the owner of, and typically it's food from the pushcart vendors as well.
Thank you. And then the last question is the suspensions and permit revocations. The change about there being no further appeal to City Council. So I'm just, for more detail on that, I mean, usually that comes about because we're being inundated and our time is there's some issue there that's come up, but I think I heard you say that there hasn't really been an issue. And so I'm wondering why the change. And I'll just say I would like to still retain the ability for appeal to council, but so I'm interested in sort of why that change?
Chair Sneddon, we looked at that as a compromise between past practice and our existing procedures and regulations for code of conduct. In the rest of the Parks and Recreation Department operations, it simply is well, not simply, but it's a well-thought-out process, but it ultimately, the decision is made by staff, and the Parks and Recreation director can be, the decision can be appealed to the director. In the Arts and Crafts Show's case, the decisions can be appealed to the Park and Recreation Commission. That gives very careful consideration to the individual cases, and there have been a number of cases that have been appealed to the commission, but never once has it gone to City Council in the entire, over 50-year history of the show.
Yeah. So I think exactly for that reason is why I think let's just keep it then, and so that it's available. Okay, do we have any other questions from the committee? So we have public comment, and our first in the room is Nicole Horston. Welcome.
I'm a member of the Santa Barbara Arts and Crafts Show Committee, on the advisory committee, on the craft side. We spent the last, more than a year going over all of the things that Jason has outlined, the rules, regulations, integration, and it's pretty much been a unanimous effort to get this forward to help modernize the show. It's something that we really needed, and something that we've been pushing for the last, since I've been on the board, on and off since 2016. So it's something that we've been trying to get through. So thankfully we've done it because it's helped modernize the show, and we feel it's helped make the show more vibrant and welcoming to more customers and the locals that just love it. They love seeing us there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for what you bring to Santa Barbara. Yeah. And do we have a public commenter online?
We do not.
Okay. With that, it is to the committee. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just, there's nothing, I don't see that I would hold this back from moving on, and I'd just like to thank all involved for the updating that you're doing. This is kind of one of those little iconic things in Santa Barbara that has, that just happened however many years ago, and then you just don't realize how iconic it is till somebody visits town and says, what the heck is that every Sunday, and how cool is that? And the clinging to the, whatever the phrase was in their traditional means of, arts and crafts and fine art, or just art, that you basically have to follow it from inception to end product rather than commercially produced or something, is something you don't see very much anymore, and I think is a great and rewarding characteristic of this type of event to hang on to. When I was dating my wife, my then retired parents-in-law were dragging a trailer around when malls were still active in Northern California, and my mother-in-law was a fine pen and ink artist, and he was built little wood things too, and that's when every mall you would go in everywhere always had these week-long, crafts fairs or arts fairs, and it's certainly something to hang on to. You don't find them much anymore, and anything we can do to support that, I heartily endorse, and I'm just so happy to see, again, that you've made this effort, happy to see that the committee supports it, and I think anything we can do to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the Amazon and changing retail the world is a great pursuit. So I'll happily support this.
Thank you. And Councilmember Gutierrez?
Yeah, I support this as well. A lot of fond memories growing up, going down to the art walk, and I look forward to its future and support passing it to the rest of the council.
Okay, thank you. And I'll similar comments. I mean, it's such a gem in our community, and in these updates, the attention to detail and really prioritizing local individual arts, but also really updating what our concept of art is and the multiple platforms that it can be delivered in, and that crafts and arts are often intertwined. And I think I really appreciate these updates. And also the sort of reaffirmation of this in our community. So with that, I do want to retain the ability for appeal to council particularly because it's not being abused or overused, and some vendors here have been here since the beginning of the art show, and I would just hate to be in a situation where something went sideways and then council didn't have an opportunity. And though I completely respect Parks and Recreation, we appoint the members, but even an individual tree has the ability to appeal back to council. So I think it would be just to keep it in there if there is agreement with the ordinance committee for that recommendation.
So I don't have a problem with that, but do you see that as a two-stepper? We do have other situations where something starts somewhere, it gets appealed to somebody, and then it gets, if you don't like the outcome of that, we just continue to slog through it and make it a second appeal to council. I'd be happy to say that works.
Yes, so as it stands now, and maybe we can clarify, it goes to appeal, and then it goes first to Parks and Recreation, and then it could still go to Director of Parks and Recreation, but no, okay, not that. I mean, as it stands now, it goes first to Parks and Recreation, and then, if necessary, it could come to council.
Okay. Which
Yeah.
is different than what's being presented here.
I'd like to
you'd like to
revert
retain
it
that.
to how
Yep,
it,
okay.
how not make the change as presented here on that one
You ready for a motion?
point. I am, yeah.
So I'd move forward this on to council for consideration with that specific comment to consider retaining that appeal path.
With just the comment or the change already made, so that it could be approved at council. My preference would be that the change be made.
6 of one, half dozen of the other, because we'll get to discuss it again, right?
Well, if it's already, I'll just say, and then Mr. Doimus, please, but I would say if it's already changed and presented to council, then it can just be adopted as opposed to then council directing that change. and
I'm okay with
adopt
that.
it.
I'll make the motion that way, and then we'll just make, I guess there's only 3 of us that will obviously be happening one way or the other.
So are you making the recommendation to make the change?
Make the change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does the seconder of the motion?
I second that.
Okay. Do we understand the motion and the direction? Okay, with that, we'll have a roll call.
Moved by Councilmember Jordan, second by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, that the ordinance committee forward staff recommendations to city council for adoption with the addition of retaining the ability for appeals to be heard at city council.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank you.
Ready? Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
And Chair Sneddon.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you, and thanks for bringing this forward. That we're adjourned.